Hi, I'm Ben, an average Ben. Just graduated, and I'm feeling lost. Everyone else is moving forward. Imran is going to UK to further his studies. BJ found a job at a bubble tea shop, and Ming is engaged to his girlfriend. People seem to be moving on with life, but I'm going nowhere, doing nothing. But my inner voice tells me, I'm worth something. Being average doesn't make me a mediocre. I can paint my life meaningfully and colorfully. I've thought of doing something for Mother Earth. I even thought of cleaning up the house of Ama Shugyot staying next door. And I thought, I wonder, will I be able to do meaningful stuff with a group of like-minded people? Be truthful to your own. For being truthful, we gain strength and courage. Remember, alone we are weak, but together we are strong. Remember, you are not alone. We are not alone. Magadan Hapon, Sawadi Tanbai, and good day. Good afternoon to all our participants joining us from across Asia. To name a few, we have participants from Malaysia, Taiwan, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, as well as from Australia. My name is Alex. I'm a youth volunteer with Tzu-Chi Foundation. I'd like to welcome all of you and our panel to this webinar titled Climate Emergency Youth Action Seminar, Will There Be Enough Food? But before we begin, I'd like to invite you to open up your camera as we would like to take a group photo. As I count down, please continue smiling. On the count of 5. Okay, please continue opening up your cameras. Okay. So I will do a countdowns later. On the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. I would like to share a bit more about our organizer, Tzu-Chi Humanistic Youth Center, or in short, HYC. This center was set up by Tzu-Chi Foundation Singapore, where youths can use this platform to inspire each other and spread kindness together. So can you imagine a world without roti canai, halo halo, banh mi, or char kway teow? What is world peace if you are missing our favorite dish? Since young, our parents have been warning us against wasting food. Today, it is our turn to remind our younger generations that our actions can impact the environment and affect our way of life. Allow me to welcome and introduce Calvin, our moderator today. Calvin is the founder, the Planning and Development Chief of Terra SG, an award-winning environmental social enterprise. As a Singaporean, Calvin has an Asian perspective and is very experienced in education, sustainability, and partnership development. Calvin is an environmental advocate, volunteer, and leader in environmental protection and preservation in Singapore. Other than Calvin, we have our panelists who are present with us today. We have Susan, volunteer leader of Environmental Protection Mission Singapore, Tzu-Chi Singapore. Wee Hao, Director of Food Supply Strategies, Singapore Food Agency. Min Ai, Program Analyst, United Nations Development Program, as well as Nidhi, co-founder of S4S Technologies, will be joining us online. Without further ado, I will now pass on to Calvin to kickstart the webinar. Calvin, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. A welcome to everybody who is joining us online today. It's a very unique one. We're doing it online with so many people from across Asia. Well, today we are tackling a very big question. Will there be enough food? I really enjoyed this question set out by the organizer. We are looking into a very pressing issue with very diverse and very inconsistent responses. Through our responses and our conversation with many organizations and individuals over the course of our work over the last few months, it is largely dependent, their responses are largely dependent on their perspective and their own understanding of the question. Do you mean enough food for myself, or do you mean enough food for everyone? Do you mean enough food for our country, or do you mean other countries? Well, people in abundance and people in need also respond very differently to this question. People in abundance that we spoke to said, yes, there will always be enough food as long as we have the money to buy the food. That's people with abundance. But people in need tell us a different story. Well, they say, no, I already do not have enough now. I wouldn't dare wish there would be enough in the future. You see, perspective on this issue of food in general differs and demonstrate different aspects. It actually demonstrates some level of short-sightedness, through our gathering of the responses from the community, public, and individuals. It demonstrates some level of short-sightedness on the present and not so much on the future. You heard a lot of now in our responses. It demonstrates some level of selfishness pertaining to, do you mean for me or do you mean for others? This question is very obvious about what they're thinking about. And it also demonstrates some level of ignorance towards the topic of food security and abundance. And last, it also demonstrates some level of myopia about this issue being a personal one instead of a community or global one. 3 responses caught my attention. They came from 3 different groups of people that we spoke to. One group was actually the children and youth. It was actually a conversation started between me and my 2 sons. One 10 years old and the other 12 years old. So I asked this question, will there be enough food? I want to hear how a 10 and 12 years old, just next to me, knows. So my 10-year-old responded by saying, will, Daddy, will is a future tense. And it's about something in the future. Nobody really knows, and nobody can guarantee that, the answer to this question. Then my 12 years old responded, saying, nowadays science is so advanced. We can make that happen. Enough food all the way. Very natural way of saying enough food all the way. When it happens, then it becomes present tense. There is enough food. It's no longer a future tense. And I also speak to a close college friend who is a practicing journalist and a media producer. Very exposed to information and updates. I would like to hear her views. She said, there are enough food, quote unquote, yeah, but not everyone is getting access to the food they require, unquote. The third conversation was with a business friend who runs a corporate of about 200 people. I want to hear from a business leader. And he said, under what circumstances? Under what context? He asked a lot more. I don't think there's a chance. I think no way. Climate change is intensifying the destruction of food costs, the disruption of food production. I think there's a lot of wastage. So it all points to a few main points from my gathering from a lot of people that it's about taking action, it's about equity and food distribution, and it's also about the volatility of situation that we are facing every single day. It's changing every single day. But do you know what? This question seems peculiar to food and research experts that I've spoken to from our polytechnics and university. When I asked them, will there be enough food? They gave me a little smile. They said this, quote unquote, based on data and sources, there are already enough food to feed 10 billion people, although our current population is only 7.5 billion. Let me repeat, there's already enough food to feed 10 billion people, although our current population is 7.5 billion. So what is wrong? Let's find out through today's panel discussion. Well, I'm happy to have them with me today. We have Minai, we have Wihao, and we have also Susan. They'll be sharing their perspective on this, on a big question, which I've asked a lot over the last 2 months. So ladies and gentlemen, will there be enough food? First up, we have Minai, who will be sharing with us on her views about this question. Thank you. Minai, to you.
Thanks, Kelvin. I think Kelvin set the ground for the conversation really well. And in fact, I think your 10 and 12-year-old children are very wise in their answers. And this is a very interesting topic that I think Tzu-Chi has chosen for us to speak about and start their webinar series. The question of will there be enough food is something that a lot of people are asking, especially in light of the pandemic crisis that we're facing right now and the implications that has on food security. So I represent the UNDP Global Center for Technology, Innovation and Sustainable Development here in Singapore. And here at the Global Center for UNDP, we are one of the 6 global policy centers that UNDP has that is focusing on promoting sustainable development for developing countries. And we have a few areas of focus that we have. Sustainable finance, smart cities and digitalization, and sustainable agriculture and digital agriculture. So why are we looking at agriculture? I think this is a number that has been often quoted from the UN. The global population of the world will hit 9 billion in 2050. So how will we be able to feed such a big population? There's a serious food gap that we're seeing, which will require a lot more land to produce the amount of food that's needed. And given that we also struggle with other challenges such as mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions that agriculture contributes so much towards, there's also that big question of how do we produce so much more, use so much more land, and at the same time mitigate the greenhouse gases that we are going to emit, which will be so much more when the time comes in 2050. And agriculture is known to have such a huge impact on our environment. It is the dominant driver of deforestation and a lot of associated impacts on biodiversity because of how much land mass that it uses, which is more than 1/3 of the planet's land. It contributes to nearly 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions and attributes 70% of the fresh water withdrawn. So agriculture has a huge impact on our environment, and this is a huge challenge that the sector has been addressing. But at the same time, it also is so important to livelihoods around the world. It is the single largest employer in the world, and 2.4 billion people around the world depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. Yet the irony is that the vast majority of these people make less than $5 per day. So there's a serious problem that agriculture, the sector, provides for so many jobs around the world, yet a lot of these people who are farmers face the problem of poverty. And there's also a lot of gender inequality that we are seeing in the sector where almost half of the labor force is female, but yet they don't have the same access to resources, the same access to inputs and finance and credits. And all these are challenges that are largely embedded in the sector. And then there is also another challenge that we are facing in terms of the workforce that is largely aging. As young people are moving away from agricultural jobs, they're looking at moving towards urban cities where they can find better economic perspectives and better job opportunities. So a lot of this is a trend that is faced around around the world where the average age of farmers is increasing, and we are seeing a diminishing agricultural workforce. So there are many challenges that the agriculture sector has. And while the sector has a huge impact on the environment, in reverse, issues such as climate change also affect the sector and poses even more challenges, even greater challenges for the sector. Here in this diagram, you can see that they predict that if global warming were to continue as projected, there will be a net drop in the crop yields around the world. So the red areas are where the crop yields will see a fall. So as climate change continues to see increasing temperatures and increasing associated events such as droughts and floods, farmers around the world will also see their crop yields being impacted. And for a sector that already has low productivity, this will be an even greater challenge. And then, given that COVID-19 happened, what are the impacts right now? I think COVID-19 is disrupting the food industry that is already facing a lot of challenges. More than 135 million people are facing crisis levels of hunger, according to the World Food Programme. And due to COVID-19 and the global lockdown, there are an additional 130 million people are on the edge of starvation. And we see that the impacts of food security are even more prominent for the vulnerable population. And there are a lot of challenges that are faced by the food industry, such as through the supply chain disruptions, the movement of labor that is affecting the way that we can produce. So these are all challenges that are making it even harder for the food industry and even harder for food security. And at UNDP, we are focused on helping developing countries and looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. So our overall strategy for the food and agricultural commodity system is to support governments in meeting these sorts of crises and helping to reform their policies, their regulatory frameworks for more sustainable food agriculture systems. We are looking at how to promote more sustainable and resilient livelihoods for small producers in terms of supporting their needs for technology integration, for more sustainable practices, and how we can work together with different institutional partners to provide the environment that they need in order to access finance, access credit, and access the resources that they need to build a more inclusive and a more sustainable ecosystem. And at the Global Center in Singapore specifically, we have a mandate to leverage technology and innovations to help countries leapfrog their sustainable development journey. And we're focusing on supporting UNDP officers that are based in developing countries. So one of the things that we're looking at under the future of food is looking at how digital farming can help that. The transition from labor-intensive farming to data-driven farming that has seen a lot of benefits, such as improving the sustainability of agricultural practices in terms of optimizing the cost of production, reducing the inputs needed, the resources needed, and helping to increase productivity in general. So we see a lot of potential in digital farming. And because digital farming and the digital world is something that is so relevant for youths, I think the future of food also lies a lot in youth engagement. There are a lot more opportunities for agribusiness, entrepreneurship, new innovations like ICT, IoT, machine learning, data analytics, and blockchain that can be integrated into farming. And in general, the ecosystem has a lot more opportunities for agricultural employment and better income that youth would find better perspectives in engaging in. So the future of food will lie in youths. And we see that globally, there are a lot of young entrepreneurs that are tackling the Global Food Challenge. For example, we have a few of these entrepreneurs that are from the developing country that are creating solutions for the agri-food ecosystem. And I think from personal experience, we work with one of the first commercial urban farming companies in Singapore. This is part of our global innovation initiative that is called Cultivate, where we are looking for solutions that can help the developing countries in terms of the challenges that they face in agriculture. And we work with this Singapore company that is co-founded by a young entrepreneur called Danielle. And they managed to find an innovative way to produce leafy green vegetables using an underutilized car park rooftop in Singapore. So I think this is a good example of how youth can think about what are the innovative ways to tweak around the challenges that they see in their country, and how they, given that they grew up in such a digital world, in such a digitally connected world that where tech is really at the forefront of driving everything, how they can look at challenges that have existed since the past, and challenges that are so relevant to the problems that we are seeing today, to integrate technology and innovation to tackle these problems. So young entrepreneurs really have a lot that they can do. And I'm just going to end off with this quote from the FAO. Youth are the agents of change who are the best equipped to lead in innovation and technology, not just in the agriculture sector, but other sectors as well. Because their generation is the most connected and has a particularly creative perspective on how to apply digital agriculture to meet the challenges their communities are facing. So I think that as youth, even as a young person myself, I think that our generation really has a strong impetus to be the agents of change, and look at the challenges and how we can be more innovative and how we can use technology to bridge these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Minai. Yeah, it was a really insightful portion to look at how innovation, technology, youth entrepreneurship can actually come together to make our food supply, our food in the future get better and better. I hear things like digital farming. Gets me excited to research a little bit about it more. Well, without further ado, let's go next to our next speaker, which is Nidhi, which is from Science for Society. Can I get her to share with us her view as well? Hi, welcome, Nidhi. Sure, we'll wait for you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nidhi Pant. I joined from Mumbai, India. Thank you for highlighting it really well, Min. And you have really highlighted the problems that we all have been facing. And I would like to really contextualize here uh, with respect to Southeast Asia and the work we have been doing at S4S Technology called Science for Society. So, from your farm to your marketplace, there are many losses, food losses that we face. This is due to storage, handling, transportation, and sometimes just due to the appearance of it. The farmers, this is what, if you see a typical morning on the first quadrant, you would see a morning in India, in the marketplace, how you would see the labors, how they have been handling the perishables, which is your fruits and vegetables in any common local market. And then as we move, these are different scenarios that happen in the supply chain, including what happens at the farm, and also the way in which there is a lot of changes in the hand. We see the wastage to be really high in the entire supply chain because of, from your various season, uh, inadequate infrastructure at the farm level, distant markets. Farmers never get the right price for the produce, as and what Min mentioned is very true, that they are also earning less than $2 per day in India and other developing countries. They never get the right price for their produce. A lot of times, the cost of transportation is greater than the value of the produce. In agriculture in countries like India, because there are so many people to feed, the prices are regular, are governed by the government. It is never your cost plus way. It is always top down, which is determined by the government. And in this case, the selling price is what is decided in the marketplace, and the farmer, even if his cost of production is high, has to accept it. And especially in countries like Southeast Asia, where there is so much of land fragmentation that's happening because of cultural practices also, and also historically this is done. we see that there are smaller and smaller farms. There are major smallholder farmers uh, who are at the receiving end of it. At in India, uh, agriculture employs more than 50% of the workforce in India. So 51% people are dependent on agriculture as its primary source of income. So at one end, you see that there is so much food wasted in the supply chain, and at the other end, you see that there are kids who don't even get proper 2 meals per day and are suffering from malnutrition. So it's really a question, as we are discussing today, is that there is enough food for probably everyone in the world, but are we meeting it? There is food wasted more than seven of worth more than $17 billion in India. And the numbers globally are in a similar way really high. And if every 30 second one farmer commits suicide because the land is not enough to meet his ambitions, and also because of various challenges like drought and climatic challenges that they face. Seeing all of this together, also very briefly, how Kim mentioned, is that most of these men actually migrate to cities in search of jobs and other allied activities, leaving women to work at on the farm. They are responsible for running the household and also at the farm. And because of patriarchy, they never get any benefits of any schemes because they are not qualified as farmers. They're qualified as cultivators because of the land going to their husband or to their brother. It's so challenging to see that women are working, but they can never, they are landless women farmers who are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Seeing these multiple things happening in my family and also of of my village is when I studied chemical engineering, and at that point of time, with a couple of my other college friends, we decided that there are uh, not only one challenge when you start tackling agriculture. You need to do from scratch to totality. So this our solutions were designed for post harvest, but we map the entire supply chain and also help the farmers in whatever they require, starting from access to finance, market, and also the innovative technologies that they can deploy at the farm. These are smallholder farmers, so for them affordability is also a big challenge. There are various models that have come into place highlighting those issues. I would start by what we do. Seeing this, what we decided, we saw that okay, what we can do is that the B and C grade produce, for which the farmers don't get the right price, can be dehydrated on the farm. Dehydration is a process of removal of water and increasing the shelf life. So the farmers can now process the produce and use it for their own consumption. Fruits and vegetables and like other categories, pulses, grains, have a very less shelf life, which is only 15 days. So they would all, by the time it reaches the market, it would get rotten and would be also lead, the wastage would lead to emission of more poisonous methane in the environment as compared to carbon dioxide. So the greenhouse gas that are emitted are also very dangerous. So we decided that we would process at the farm. So our system is called solar conduction dryer. It uses the principle of drying, removal of water, and increasing the shelf life without addition of chemicals and preservatives. Uh, and this is all deployed at the farm where the farmer is uh, producing. So they know whatever will not be tabletop quality, whatever is the B and C grade produce, which just does not meet the size specification, is what we use in dehydration. You can use wide variety of material starting from staples, pulses, grains, fruits, vegetables, meat, chicken, anything except milk and watermelon. And all of this happens in 6 to 8 hours. Sun drying is very traditionally practiced in Southeast Asia, but what happens is that it has a lot of contamination because it takes either 3 to 4 days to dehydrate, and due to no, uneven drying, there is also some parts that are uniform, and for other parts there is microbial growth or there is a nutrition loss. So our technology is tested in this way that it retains 85 to 95% of nutrients, and does not have we do, does not lead to any degradation of color, aroma. But we saw that this was not only solving the problem. So now, after dehydration, the farmer can use this as a food security and consume it throughout the year. So they divided this way that three parts is what they commercially sell to us, which is the surplus produce, and the one part is what we use for our they use for their own consumption. So earlier they used to end up eating only rice. Now they have access to more micronutrient rich fruits and vegetables, which they can use for their own consumption, and the storage is also not very huge. Earlier in India, when you don't have electricity at the right uh, in right to for in every village, and is only one phase electricity, using solutions like cold storage is also a challenge because it requires continuous amount of energy. So the farmers who don't have any fridge or anything now use this as also a very right way of storing their produce. So basically, a model this works this way is that we give farmers the technology which is deployed at their farm. It's a small farm system that we create. It's a three-piece machine, which includes the entire food processing systems: cutter, primary processing, secondary processing. The farmers process it, we buy back. It comes to a central unit where it is owned and operated by us. We do quality checks and grading, sorting, metal detection, and sell it to majority of food and beverage industries as ingredients. So anywhere from your Unilever, Nestle, bigger packaged food companies, Sodexo, Indian Railways, and small hotel, restaurant, catering industry now use these products made by our farmers as ingredients. They can use it in different ways. These are ready to use, so there is no wastage at the customer end also, and it is more competitive in terms of pricing, and also maintains all nutrition, and it's ready to use. It saves time, energy, and cost for them, as this is the most energy efficient supply chain, because we are processing where we produce. The energy for processing is same as energy for preservation, and also because there is a significant amount of weight and volume reduction, we are not transporting water. So if you transport onions, you would require 10 trucks to do say 1 ton of onion. Now these dehydrated onion, there is 10 times weight and volume reduction. You would require only one truck to transport it. So this is also in a way eliminates the middleman, and also makes it more resilient in terms of the transportation being reduced.
Sorry,
This
Niti,
is
I got to stop you there a little. Yeah, sure. That's okay. Please go ahead. Yeah.
yes, so in this way, things that we have been able to solve are three things. One is preventing the food wastage in the supply chain, and helping women farmers earn assured additional income, and doing all of this in the most sustainable manner using solar powered technology. Thank you.
I think from the previous two speakers, you for the participants online, you would have realized that there are a few key areas that they focus on some common grounds especially. We see things like tech solution, leveraging on tech, leveraging on innovation to achieve what we want here. We also see a lot of keywords like partnerships, striking a lot of meaningful and mutual partnerships to achieve what we want, as well as policy shifts and capacity building. I think we have caught some of this online just now from the two speakers. Well, now let us move on to the Q&A session, the part one of the Q&A session. Can we pull out the questions from some of the participants and audience at home? And let me pull out some of this question right now. So part one, this question is addressed to Min Ai. Min Ai, please. Yeah. So how has COVID-19 impacted food security around the world? how are the challenges in developing world different from those in developed worlds, developed countries? Sorry.
Um, I think this is a question that the answer that I touched a bit about on my presentation. Um, the pandemic has created even greater challenges for food security around the world. But the challenges that we face for food security have been around for the longest time. These are questions that we have been talking about, we have been addressing, we have been looking at for a really long time already. And there are always questions about um, climate change and the impact of our food system on climate and vice versa, whether climate change will impact our food system. So these will be even greater challenges due to the pandemic. And I think what the pandemic will do is that it will make the the inequalities and the inequities that we see in the food system even more disparate. The people that don't have access to food will see even greater challenges. I mean, just more immediate things like the food prices hiking because of people panic buying. This immediate short-term impact from the pandemic has already made prices higher and food unaffordable for a lot of people. And in the long run, I think there will be even more uncertainties. As you mentioned, the food challenge is something that's very complex. We cannot predict what will happen in the future, but we know that the challenges that we were already facing will become something that is even more prominent. And in terms of the differences of the challenges between developing countries and developed countries, I think something that you mentioned earlier on is very relevant. Maybe sometimes the question is not about whether there's enough food, but about whether the supply and the demand are meeting each other, whether the food that is available is meeting the people that need the food. Yeah, and that I think is where there's a huge difference for the developing world and the developed world context. For the developing world, most of the issue lies with food loss at the production level. So it's a lot due to the lack of information, resources, inputs, and as I mentioned, just a lot of the lack of infrastructure and support and logistics also for farmers that create a lot of agricultural losses. So that is where we see most of the food wasted, even though they are already being produced. And that is a challenge for developing countries. But for developed countries, we face a different issue that is more on the consumer side. Yeah, I think food waste is something that we are all quite familiar with as a challenge. But for developed countries, that is something that is even more prominent and is very different from the challenges that the developing world face. So the challenges for developed countries is looking more at the consumer side of the food waste challenges that we have in terms of like restaurants and even at the retail level, where people choose better looking food, and that is how all the food gets wasted. And so it's not a question really of whether there's enough food, but how do we get the food that is produced, and how do we get food to reach the right channels? Yeah.
We're actually facing, from what you have mentioned, we're actually facing a very complex issue here.
Yeah.
So other than facing climate change, before COVID-19 starts, we're already facing huge issue in food security. So the pandemic actually further intensified this challenge. And in addition, we are facing a people issue, different cultures, different background, and different societies and economies around the world. It looks like we have a lot to do. I think UNDP have a lot to do, and everyone in this panel have a lot to do today. Well, thank you, Minai. Yeah, maybe move on to the next question. Let me take a look. Yeah, this is addressed to Niti. Yeah. Okay, so due to food shortage, are GMOs another solution for preventing starvation in the future? Is there any scientific proof regarding to safety or harm to consumer? Niti, please.
So, thanks for the question. Yes, we have seen not primarily for food, but in terms of GM adoption in cotton supply chain in India and how that has increased the family income and indirectly given more access to food for the other families. But GM seeds are produced primarily by only a few large companies who own the IP or for these genetic variation. A transition to a GM crop crop would closely align to global food productions. From an economic standpoint, I would say it would be difficult to rely completely on certain of these few companies who produce this. So I'm not sure if this is a long term solution, because if they fail, it would be difficult for others who are dependent on it. And yes, there are scientific proofs regarding the safety of these genetic modified crops. So as of now, we do not use any GM genetic modified seeds in our supply chain. But I have seen both the kinds of arguments for uh, pros and cons regarding the same. But as per our standpoint, we do not encourage, or we try to not use any genetics modified produce. Instead, we have been moving towards natural farming. Yes. So
Okay,
I
thank
would
you.
not say that is a
Yeah,
direct
Nitish.
solution.
Yeah, thank you. So we can hear that actually GMOs not the preferred solution. Doesn't sounds like long-term solution for all of us in the world. We want to rely on it primarily. I think we got to relook and rethink about this being a solution for all of us. Do we have time to move on to the next question? Yes, thank you. Let's move on to the next question towards Minai as well. Um, Urban farming. So the title is urban farming by the audience. How do we make it affordable for farmers to do it in Singapore in terms of the ROI or the returns of investment?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is quite a difficult question. I might not be the best person. Maybe SAV colleague here would be better to answer this question, but I'll try my best. I think the challenges in terms of affordability when it comes to farming with technology always comes from the cost of the technology that tends to be high in comparison to the ability that the farmer is able to make back from their produce. Because food in general, the price that it can fetch is not very high. You cannot make vegetables sell for so much more money, and especially because food, if you do want to produce food in a local context, say for Singapore's objective, if say the food is unaffordable, then what is the point of growing locally if it doesn't feed the people, right? So there is a bit of that balance issue there. And the issue with Singapore farming, other than the technology, is also the land area. The cost of land is high in Singapore because it's very, very dense, and it's an urban city. So these are the challenges that urban farmers in Singapore would face. So there is a need for different ecosystem partners to come together. Like the government has to provide policies in place and support for entrepreneurs that are willing to take the challenge. The private sector has to support it as well in terms of investments and just providing an environment where urban farming entrepreneurs would be supported. And then perhaps with innovation, to look at different ways at how, even if land is expensive, how do we look at, I guess, underutilized spaces to grow farms? I mean, I've seen a lot of examples where urban farm entrepreneurs have set up their farms on commercial, like commercial rooftops, and these are ways that they can look at in a more innovative way of seeing how they can make it more affordable for them, or working with the different partners to make sure that land is not so expensive, or they can find ways that make it make the barriers to entry not so high. Yeah, and I think it's just in general looking at how to be more innovative and looking at ways to reduce that cost of the technology.
Looks like what you have mentioned is a lot about motivation. Although the word is not really mentioned, but I noticed that there's a lot about motivation to get farmers or local farmers to want to be embarking on this journey in Singapore, both from an economic point of view. So you have to make economic sense for farmers who are privately owned. Then you got to make societal sense. So that's where the government can step in a little more to incentivize and make it a need, because it's about survival, it's about food. I think there will be a sharing about 30 by 30 later by Wee Hao. We will hear a little more from a government perspective on how this has actually been done. Yeah. So right next, actually, we have Wee Hao joining us as well. So maybe I just pass the time to Wee Hao to continue the topic a little more.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. And in fact, in my presentation, I will touch a little bit about how government is helping urban farmers to make urban farming more commercially viable in Singapore. I'm very happy to be here to address all of you. Thanks very much for the invitation. Today we're talking about how COVID-19 has really impacted the global food supply chain and the question of how can we ensure that we have enough food. And today I want to share with you how the Singapore government, the Singapore Food Agency, is going to ensure that Singapore, at least in Singapore, we will have enough food for our citizens. Okay, before we go into it, maybe let me start with an overview of what Singaporeans are eating today. Singaporeans love food, right? And here you can see a table of the commonly consumed food items that we have in Singapore. And you probably don't realize how much food you really eat. So for example, every person in Singapore actually consumes about 43 kgs of rice per year. 43 kgs, that's 4 packs of 10 kgs rice per person. And if you put it into the rice cooker, it multiplies by 3 or 5. That is the amount of rice that each person consumes per year, right? Or even eggs. Every person consumes 360 eggs a year. That means every person eats at least 1 egg a day. That's quite a lot. So yes, Singaporeans love food, and it shows in the volume of food that we consume. Now, where does our food come from? More than 90% of our food is actually imported, right? We produce less than 10% of our food supply. And when we import our food, we actually import it from all over the world, from over 170 countries and regions all around the world. And major food sources would include places like Malaysia, Brazil, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, etc. Now, the threat of a food supply disruption to Singapore is very real, and this is the reason why the Singapore government takes our food security strategies very seriously. Just now, Minai mentioned a little bit about some of the potential threats to our food supply. So for instance, she talked about how the UN has projected that by 2050, the global population is going to reach about 9 billion people, right? What this translates into actually is a 60% increase in global food demand. So global food demand is going to rise. On the other hand, global production of food is projected to fall with climate change. So, and again, Rina, I mentioned a little bit just now about the impact of climate change on food production in the world. By 2050, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has projected that crop use could decline by up to 25%. So on the one hand, you have a situation whereby global food demand is rising. On the other hand, global food supply may be falling because of climate change, and it's going to be exacerbated by other factors as well, such as environmental degradation. Many areas around the world, are facing, pollution and degradation of their agricultural land. The wild catch, the wild fisheries in the oceans are declining as well. So there is a real possibility that global food production may not keep up with global food demand. And even if global food production can keep up with global food demand, it is possible that the flow of food into Singapore may be disrupted by various factors, such as geopolitics and transport choke points. And it has happened in other places around the world as well. For example, in the case of the Qatar blockade in 2017. So, we are taking a potential food supply disruption very seriously, and to address that, we have what we call 3 food baskets, and these are our 3 food security strategies. The first one is to diversify our import sources. The second one is to grow local, and the third one is to grow overseas. And I'm going to go through each of these 3 food baskets in some detail in my next few slides. Now first, let me talk about diversifying import sources. The reason why we want to diversify our import sources is this. We want to try to reduce over-reliance on any single source. Now, the more we diversify our import food sources, the less each source will provide us in terms of the percentage of total food supply. And so if any one of those sources gets cut off for whatever reason, it could be extreme weather, droughts, floods, etc., the percentage impact on us from that one source becomes smaller because it doesn't form a very large percentage of our supply. So that is a very important part of our food security strategies. In order to do that, we've been accrediting more import sources. We've been bringing our importers to these new sources to network and then encourage them to bring in supply from these new countries. However, it is also very risky to depend on just imports. Now, we've talked a little bit about how COVID-19 has disrupted the global food supply chains, right? And specifically, agricultural workforces who have been, affected by COVID have been prevented from working in the fields. The transport routes have been disrupted, as for example, airlines grind to a halt, containers and reefers get stuck in certain ports, etc. And certain countries have also imposed export bans on their food produce in order to cater to domestic needs. So we are seeing that it is not sufficient to just diversify our import sources, because in a situation whereby globally the supply chains all get disrupted, you cannot be overly reliant on the external sources in the first place. Which then brings me to the second food security strategy, which is to grow local. Now, this would then reduce our reliance on imports in events of a global food supply disruption, as well as buffer the supply disruptions and buy us time to react. Now, local production has actually evolved quite a lot over time. In the 1960s, we had as many as 20,000 farms in Singapore, occupying up to 20% of our land area. And then in the 1970s, we moved towards industrialization, and there were competing land use needs such as housing and industry. And so today, we have around 200 food farms. They occupy less than 1% of our agricultural land. And these are some of the more prominent local farms. You may have heard of them before, such as Royal Fish Farm, Barramundi Asia. We have 3 egg farms, Seng Chun, N&N, and Shoes. And we have more than 80 vegetable farms. Some names that you may find in the supermarkets, would include Citiponics, Ely, as well as Sky Greens. Now, our aim is to produce 30% of Singapore's nutritional needs locally by 2030. Today, we produce less than 10%. So from 10% to 30% actually is a fairly ambitious goal, right? It is more than 3 times of increase. And there are several challenges that we need to address. So for instance, I talked a little bit about how less than 1% of land is set aside for agriculture today. The agricultural workforce is aging, and it's quite hard to attract a next generation of people to come in. And also, consumers are a little bit price sensitive, and that makes it a challenge to raise demand for local produce. But we can achieve our 30 by 30 vision through technology. Technology has now made it possible for us to produce 10 to 15 times more vegetables and fish per hectare compared to traditional soy-based vegetable farms and also land-based fish farms. So we're addressing each of the 3 challenges that I mentioned earlier on, one by one. So for instance, we're developing more spaces for food production. We've been launching agricultural land tenders since 2017. And also, we are now in the process of studying how we can plan and redevelop Lim Chu Kang so that, it can be better planned for food production with shared facilities that will lower cost of production for farmers, and also have some elements of circularity whereby waste products of one farm can become an agri-input for another. And we're also studying how we can expand fish farming in the southern waters in an environmentally sustainable way. We have an exciting project coming up called the Agri-Food Innovation Park in Sungai Kaduk. So SFA has been working with JTC, EDB, ESG on that. And this Agri-Food Innovation Park, or AFIP, will basically have high-tech farming and R&D facilities such as indoor vegetable farms, insect farms, animal feed production, and also high-value agri-inputs and solutions for urban indoor farming. So this AFIP project is coming up early next year. And besides agricultural land, we're also going to make use of underutilized spaces in the city for food production. And this will include vacant state buildings, such as, former secondary schools, and also multi-story car parks in the HDB heartlands. They have the rooftops, which are not very well utilized today. We are launching tender for more vegetable farms to be built on those multi-story rooftop car parks. We are also supporting the industry's adoption of technology through funding and facilitation. In terms of funding, we have been fairly generous. We're providing incentives to co-fund the farm's investments in high-tech, high-productivity funding systems, up to 70% or 85% of the cost of projects. So it's quite a significant funding assistance to the farms. And we're also facilitating the adoption of these technologies with account managers who will advise the farms on what sorts of technologies are suitable for their production. And we also match the farmers with the solution providers as well. We've organized networking sessions between the farmers and the solution providers. We bring them overseas to see what kinds of technologies are being employed overseas as well. And we want to push the boundaries of technology itself. And so besides the funding that we are providing to farmers to adopt technology, we have $144 million set aside for what we call the Singapore Food Story R&D program to fund sustainable urban food production, future foods such as alternative proteins, and also food safety science and innovation. Besides that, we want to attract and place and retain a new generation of local talent pool so that younger people can take over the aging agricultural workforce today. And this is actually an exciting area which young people would be very interested to join, because it's no longer the old back-breaking, difficult work of working in the open fields in the past, but an exciting industry now involving biotechnology, AI, environmental engineering, as well as robotics. We are also growing demand for local produce. We have organized farmers markets together with the Singapore Agri-Food Enterprise Federation. And these farmer markets have also, besides being taking place physically, we've also moved them online. So Lazada RedMart also has an equivalent of an SG Farmers Market online as well. We've organized workplace roadshows to Google's office, to Mediopolis at One North, to basically drum up support for local production. And at the same time, we're also organizing collaborations with the supermarkets to promote local produce through cooking demonstrations and other publicities as well. And this year, the year 2020, we have designated it as the year of the Singapore Food Story. And so we have a whole year-long series of campaigns and events to drum up people's awareness of food security in Singapore and to raise demand for local production. We've launched a new logo, the Choose Fresh local produce logo that you see on the screen, to make it easier to identify local produce. And we've also recently launched a citizens work group chaired by our Senior Minister of State, Amy Khor, to get ideas from citizens on how to raise demand for local produce. And our third basket is basically to help our local agri-food companies, besides growing locally, to also then expand overseas and then make use of ample land and sea spaces overseas to grow and produce, and potentially then to export it back to Singapore. And so these are the ways that we are ensuring that Singapore continues to have a stable supply of food despite the COVID situation and other potential food supply disruptions.
Thank you, Wei Hao. I think after hearing from Hui Yao, we can be very sure that we will still have foods on our plates in years to come. So not to worry, okay? Especially for Singaporean, I got to clarify on that. Yeah. So you hear from Wei Hao, all the three different baskets that he actually mentioned. It's an ambitious plan, from what we are hearing here. And there's a lot of focus on growing locally, and also a lot of efforts in terms of diversifying our food sources, which are brilliant ideas that will actually help us get a more secured food supply to all of us here in Singapore. Okay, thank you, Wei Hao. Maybe now let's move on to Susan. Yeah, Susan will actually share with us a little more in the next few minutes. Yeah, Susan, please.
Thank you, Kelvin. This topic, will there be enough food, is actually quite an interesting topic for us as an organization, to be very frank. All my earlier panelists, they are really very professional. So allow me to humbly share our way of thoughts about this topic. We mainly came from the perspective of coexisting with our Mother Earth by being sustainable at the source point and to have a sustainable lifestyle. We has a mission within our organization of the Environment Protection Mission, which we actually started in 1990s. And to date, at that point of time, we actually just started out of employing hand to do recycling work. That was in 1990. But as the whole environment and the whole situation have evolved, this topic has gone beyond just recycling work, as the topic we are talking today as well is also of concern to us in terms of environment protection. And our environment protection mission has now grown globally to many footprints in about 16 countries by now. And in Singapore itself, we started in 1994, also with hands to do the recycling work. And today we have spread our wings to 39 locations on this Singapore island, which not only focus on just recycling work, but the awareness of environment protection in a wider perspective, including the topic we are covering today with regards to food. Yeah. So as I mentioned, our very simple mindset towards this topic is that we do want to coexist with the earth. And to coexist with the earth is actually everyone's responsibility, which we take it very much within our organization in every individual of us here. And this climate change is coming with a lot of carbon emission that through our activity, our lifestyle is creating, impacting to the Mother Earth. So in order to mitigate this climate change, for us, it's a matter of carbon equivalent versus the mind equivalent. That is where our mindset is very, very important. We are an organization full of volunteers, so we come from the mindset perspectives of individual and everyone responsibility to mitigate that. So in our environment protection, the accent of how we drive our mission work is to be sustainable at the source point. And we use this pyramid over here throughout all the practices, all the habits that we like to actually educate or cultivate our volunteer towards. So this pyramid is very, very versatile. It can apply to any perspective regards to environment. So in today's topic, talking about food security, the way we will apply this pyramid is that to start with, the first thing is to refuse what with regards to food. If we need to have a concern about food security, we need to refuse food waste. We heard so much earlier panelists shared with us how difficult, how challenging, how tough it is for the farmers to grow all this food. So we as individuals, we need to really refuse food waste. We don't waste away the food that is so much effort put in by the farmers. This is how we take it from our organization. We have to reduce if we cannot avoid it. So, I mean, Singaporean love food, as you mentioned just now. So maybe from the start, used to like cook 5 dishes for a meal. It's a habit. If you can't refuse not wasting food, you don't know how to, then we encourage everybody, why don't you try to reduce? Let's try to do 4 dishes. 3 dishes is an effort step by step. But where we're coming from at the source point, we like everybody to try the top first, come to the bottom, then to the recycle. So in terms of food, the food waste, the recycle, we talk about compost, that should become last. We should try our best to practice this 5R from the top. That is where we're coming from. So the lifestyle is really, we come to food as individual, I think our food lifestyle is very, very important to combat this. And then allow me to share from our organization different so-called culture or practices we have within our organization. So from a sustainable way, I use this word in a very casual manner. What is a sustainable dining culture here? Jingsi Aboy is our base back in Hualien. This poster you see here, let's cherish food. This is spread across all our organization. So right at our headquarters, where all our religious teachers are, they lead us by example. They lead us by having this culture in their headquarters here. Let me share a bit with you what they are doing and what we also volunteer learn to do. When we have a meal, whenever we have a meal, you see this picture, this photo on the right. We have this education within our organization that we try not to waste even the single last drop of food residue in our dining bowl and things like that. And then this picture you see here, we actually will use, let's say, a leafy vegetables, put on some water, and then scrape up the food residue on the bowl so that your bowl will be very clean. Yeah. And another culture that we have is that usually we have a lot of volunteers dining at our dining hall, whereby somehow or another we try our best to reduce food waste or leftover. I will say we almost avoid food waste. We try to avoid leftovers. So at a dining hall like this, with so many people, sometimes it's not easy to really manage it to the last drop. That there's no leftover. So what our religious teacher do is that for lunches and breakfast, any leftover from these 2 meals will be we use I don't know what's the word. We use the common chopsticks to take our serving, so the dishes are all very hygiene clean. So whatever is left over from the meals are all consolidated and made into new dish sometime or warm up. And for dinner, our religious teacher are just taking this. So the food that is cooked for the day will be finished within the day. Yeah. So this is the kind of culture that we practice over there. And recognizing that depending on external supply of food can also be quite tough for us. So we actually also recognize self-sufficiency. So we grow our own vegetables to supply our own needs in the headquarters as well. Another thing we do is that we in this last 2 places of typhoon, we actually have to rebuild the world rice producer, which is Myanmar and Thailand. When they were hit by typhoon, our rice supply globally actually does face some kind of shortages, and actually the price went up. And these farmers actually they as just now some of you have presented, they really grow to the last bit. They're so financially so weak that every harvest they try to sell away every single rice that they harvest. So when they were hit by typhoon, it was quite a bad situation. And our founder actually recognized that we need to give them very quality grain seed so that they can have a good harvest. Then the world will not enter into a very severe rice shortage. Yeah. So when they have a very productive harvest, they are happy. Then we as consumers are also happy with when they are able to get productive harvest. And with this productive harvest, they also have extra to in the end also help other people. So they actually grab that they could only have this harvester, so they actually grab all this harvest by the pump, and then they consolidate to help other people in to reach out to more people. In our charity fair, we do a lot of awareness education, going to every dining table, propagating everybody not to try to avoid not having any leftover, so that we will minimize food waste. And when we clean up the tables, we also try to scrape off every single food waste we could see, and we actually put them to composting. There's this conventional composting we will bring it to. There's also a food waste digester that we bring it to. So we try to close this up and minimize any food that could be waste away. So in overall, regardless of the whatever direction we are going, and environment protection with regards to this food or any other aspects of environment, our team has this team motto since 2015. Through a COOP discussion, our founders say that we have been talking a lot. We recognize the issue. All of us understand what is the prevailing issue for us in this environment situation. We need to have a common consensus, which is we are here today on the same topic. We all have the common consensus. The food is not easily grown. It comes really very precious. You need technology, you need labor. We all need to recognize this. We need to have that. Then the next thing is we need to action together. We can talk a lot. We can have the understanding, we can have consensus, but we really need to action together from every perspective. All of you from professional, how to use technology to grow food in a more productive way. We as individuals, we have to be responsible in our consumerism. Then this is action together. Then we can combat this food security issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. I think from Susan, we hear a few key points over here, if I could sum up a little. I personally like the part a lot about the 5 Rs. The 5 Rs, sustainability at source. I think it's a good reminder for everyone, online, our audiences, to understand that actually recycling or composting is not the first preferred choice in many a times. We shouldn't use that as the only way to salvage food waste. I think starting at source, which is the refusing, reducing, reusing, repairing, are all better ways. And there is actually a sequence to that. I hope the audiences know that there's actually a sequencing that you should go for refusal or reduction before you go straight to recycling. I think this is one thing, it's a really good point, I think, what Susan brought up to us. I think we could all keep that in mind. And also, I think we, other than looking at technology and innovation from the first three speakers, we noticed that Tzu-Chi actually are doing a lot of humanitarian-based work, like rebuilding the farmers and the farmland for the world, crop producers in Myanmar and Vietnam. This is another approach to many things. It just points to us that there are many solutions to a single problem if we all put our energy and efforts together, as one. Yeah, thank you, Susan, once again. Yeah, so let us move into part 2 of our Q&A. Let me take a look at some of the questions that are actually submitted. Okay, so first question will be addressed to Wee Hao. Yeah, Wee Hao. So the question is, can the government mandate every new public or private housing devote to put aside space for community farming? Next, this would bring the community together and partially help with food availability. What do you think, Wee Hao?
Actually, in fact, the government is already doing that. In our HDB estates, it's very common to find community gardening plots in the common spaces. So basically, the community is already using these gardening plots to grow food. And the community does come together and then share resources, share their produce among the neighbors as well. And just now I also mentioned a little bit about how there are other underutilized spaces in the HDB heartlands that we can use for production. So for instance, in the multi-story car parks, the rooftops tend to be a bit less popular as a parking space because of the heat from the sun. And so we've worked with HDB to tender out quite a few of these spaces for farming within the heartlands. So these are some of the ways in which we're bringing community farming into the heartlands, as well as some types of commercial farming too.
So you see, with that, although it's not a mandate, we can see that we are actually having a lot of plans to use these public spaces, to utilize these underutilized spaces into farming availability for everyone. So we hope you answered that question for the audience. So can we go next question? So that's addressed to Susan. Susan, yeah, how can we move from mindset change to behavioral change? Mindset to behavioral change. Susan.
This is a very long project. Human construction project, I would say. For us, as I shared just now, for environment protection, we come 30 years. This 30 years, we also see this change to be very baby steps. But importantly, if they have the understanding about the topic first, that will assist the behavioral change. When there is a bigger pool of people sharing the same mindset, that we need to be responsible, we can do something about it, learning some technology that they have shared, that there's a pool of people coming together. The visibility of this mass group of people doing the thing. I believe when people come together with the same mindset, we will influence each other to have a behavioral change. That is what somehow we are also doing in Tzu-Chi, among our volunteers. We go out together, then we'll be like reminding each other, you practice the first R, second R, that kind of thing, When you're in that kind of a group of mind alike, then the behavioral change will come. So choose the right people to be with.
Choose the right people to be. Is that a message to all of us? So moving from mindset change to behavioral change is very important, but it is also a very long process, like what Susan has shared with us. Thank you, yeah, Susan. So do we have time to move on to the next question? Yeah, good. Thank you. So for Wee Hao, the next question, do you think we can legislate to limit certain F&B practices with a lot of food wastage? For example, buffet restaurants, this might be a good time to rethink about it since many hotels have also stopped breakfast buffet due to COVID-19. What do you think about this question? Yeah.
I think first of all, the question of food wastage is something that, as society, we must first believe in reducing before we think about, imposing a rule top down. Because first of all, you do want to have buy-in within the community that, food wastage is something that's important to address. And so you first address it at an individual level, and like you say, if you're able to then address it within your family and among, your groups of friends, and let it be a lifestyle and a certain mindset, that would be a more effective way of addressing this issue. Whether or not the government imposes a rule to mandates that you shall not have a certain amount of wastage doesn't quite address the issue at the root. So it's more important to actually look at the root of the problem.
So which means, are you saying that societal development and education and getting people to buy in towards reducing food waste is more important than just merely meting out legislation?
Absolutely. And in fact, forums and discussions like this help to percolate that mindset across society.
I see. Any opinions from other panelists? Susan, any opinion regarding this?
He enhanced on my 5R already.
He have enhanced for you the 5Rs on this, yeah. So legislation is not entirely the only way. Most of the time, like we said just now, there are many solutions to a single problem. I think what we are suggesting here is that we could look at education as well as getting more buy-in from a societal level before we look at using legislations and rules to just enforce it directly. Okay, thank you, Mihal. Yeah. Let's go for the next one. We have lots of time now. For Susan, the next one. Yeah. Okay, how can we encourage youths to consume more sustainably?
I think the youth today, they are very much aware about the topic. To consume more sustainability is a habit, a lifestyle again. I would think that participating in eco-related or sustainable activity does help them to go towards this direction. We saw a lot that a lot of people, especially youth, they're actually very passionate about this topic. Then they're very concerned about their future, but they left with that question mark: how do I do it? And what can I do? So I would encourage youth to actually participate in more related activity and learn how to do it and learn more the process of having, let's say, vegetables. I think today we are on food security. If they could come and participate and learn how to grow these vegetables, many a time we have that kind of experience when we learn how not so easy things come to you, then it will change your behavior, how you be more sustainable. So I strongly encourage the youth to participate more actively in different kind of projects to get a wide exposure, hands-on experience, and that ultimately you will change to consume more sustainably.
So for youths out there, I think be participatory, okay? Put your hands, bring your body, just come for activities and events. I believe HYC have a lot of youth events as well. Other than that, join any local groups that, or regional groups that you are in, contribute more. And when you are big events and like what Susan mentioned, be with the right people, doing things together, I think you can consume more sustainably as well from there. Okay, the last question. We have our last question for today. Okay, Wihao, back to you. Have we actually considered growing crops that are not conventional in Singapore or import crops that are not conventional, such as wild vegetable, which provide nutritional benefits that are much better than conventional ones like cai xing, xiao pai cai, spinach? Do you think this is also a diversification strategy, Wihao?
So I think from a government's point of view, our role is actually to create a facilitative environment for the agri-food industry to grow, right? So I mentioned just now about how the government is providing spaces, right? You provide incentives and co-funding supports to enable the farmers to implement technology to grow. We try to make sure that our regulations are in line with what the industry needs. So we've been reviewing regulations together with other agencies because, this high-tech indoor farming industry is quite new, and a lot of the regulations that we have today did not take this new industry into account because, when the regulations were first formulated, this new industry didn't even exist. So that is the role of the government to create this facilitative environment where the industry can thrive. What exactly the industry grows actually is a more second order issue. We want to create an environment where the industry is able to grow in the first place. So if they want to continue growing the more conventional types like Thai and Xiaobai Thai spinach, that's fine. But you can also see that there are other agri-food companies that are growing other types of vegetables like lettuce, or even strawberries. That's something that we encourage as well.
Which are not very native to us, right? Strawberries, our environment actually.
It meets our nutritional needs and it supports our food security.
So you can see that, what we have mentioned is a lot of facilitation by the government to get the environment ready for everyone to be a part of this, for example, especially the farmers, the urban farmers. So the facilitated environment, then it's up to the farmers to actually choose what kind of crops you would like to grow. This is a part on an economic stand, which we will not discuss further on this topic. But the environment will be there for you. So look further if you're interested to grow non-conventional one. For this audience who have asked us this question, do consider. I think the environment will be there for you sooner. Okay, thank you. Yes. So for this part, we have done with our Q&A. So call for action. You can see on the screen, call for action. So this is the part that we would like to invite our panelists to actually share with us, how you would get people to take action. I won't say call for action, but take action towards this topic that we are talking about today, pertaining to food. Maybe you can start from Minai.
Sure, thanks, Kelvin. So earlier on, I ended off my presentation with saying that youths are agents for change, and I think that is it's a very strong mandate, and it's very broad as well. So how can youths be agents of change, or what does being agents of change mean? And when I illustrated examples of how youth entrepreneurs can come up with innovative ways to address the food challenges that we see today, I think there's also a lot of pressure on the younger generations to be like innovators, entrepreneurs, to be like change makers, and that maybe is not something that everyone can do. Maybe not everyone can be a Greta Thunberg or needs to be a Greta Thunberg. There will be some people that can come up with those ideas, but it doesn't mean that everyone has to be an entrepreneur in order to solve the food challenge. It doesn't mean that everyone has to come up with solutions. And I think something that Susan mentioned earlier was is actually something that is more of the approach that we need to take as well, that we see ourselves as consumers of the entire ecosystem. Earlier on, I came across a quote that was pasted somewhere in the Tzu-Chi Foundation building, and it said that to solve the disasters or the crisis of the world today, we need to start with our hearts and minds. So that, I think, is something that we can channel into our everyday action, to the daily choices that we make, into how, when we are living the life that we live, how we see all the incremental changes that we can do in order to change the culture that we have, our influence on the actions of others as well. So in making small choices, sometimes it doesn't mean that you need to be like vegan in order to be more sustainable, because that is something that is a very privileged point of view, and that is also an issue and a challenge. So sometimes it's just choosing food that is more maybe grown locally, supporting the local ecosystem. These are ways that we can drive that change.
So incremental, small steps, make wise choices. Yeah, thank you. Vinay, Wihao, do you have something to share? Sorry, is it? Oh, sorry, Niti. Apologies. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I think just taking from what Minai said, taking small incremental steps is the need of the hour. There are many ways in which we can try to match the demand and supply gap. And from our end, the first step should definitely be things that come naturally to us and things that we do at our home. So starting from using more locally sourced uh, food products is what I would probably urge everyone to start with, and then look at a more systemic way where they can contribute.
Thank you, Niti. So you notice about grown locally. This is the second time it's actually grown local, consumed locally. So looks like two of our panelists are advocating that to us. Okay, Wihao, thank you to you. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, so for me, perhaps not just one call for action, but 3 calls for actions. So the first one, I'm going to repeat for the third time what Minak and Mindy have said, to buy local, because the 30 by 30 goal is a big thing for us. If you buy local, you support the local industry, that supports one of our very important food security strategies. The second call for action is this. We don't know when a serious food supply disruption is going to happen, but when it does happen, on the one hand, we make sure that our food security strategies are robust and resilient. On the other hand, the community also has to have a robust and resilient kind of mindset. So when it happens, be open to alternatives. If, let's say, the supply of fresh fish is disrupted, be open to consuming frozen fish, for instance. Or if the supply of all fish gets disrupted, be open to switching to chicken. So that's the second thing that I really urge everyone to do. The third thing is this. I think many of the people in the audience today are young people, and the agri-food industry is at a very exciting juncture in time. Technology has reached a point whereby it has become possible to really grow a lot more food on very little land and very little space. And in fact, it's even now possible to grow produce in a tropical climate like Singapore today, which was not even conceivable 5 or 10 years ago, like strawberries. So it's a really exciting industry today that merges together, traditional agriculture with new technologies like robotics and artificial intelligence. So consider seriously joining this industry. It will contribute to a very profoundly meaningful mission, which is to strengthen food security for Singapore. And perhaps you could also strengthen the food security of the whole world.
Thank you, Will. So let me echo this for him again. So support local produce, third time for this call for action. Be open to alternatives, don't be stubborn, okay? Go for different alternatives and different choices that's available out there, especially when there's major disruption to our food supply. And join industry, contribute, need the manpower. So that's some consideration for you. Well, Susan, do you have anything to share with us on call for action?
Yes. Our call will be become an urban farmer. I will be the first one to say consume locally, yeah, because we truly believe every small step that you make can really make the change. So just now I shared very much from individual and consumer level. So we like to call everybody to actually do it ourselves, and how we do it ourselves. Actually, when talking about environment, it is strongly related to our physical health as well. We can actually safeguard our physical health with a diet choice. So actually we could go for plant-based diet. Plant-based diet is very, very related to environment, because by actually rearing meat or poultry for consumption, it uses up a lot of land resources, water resources, which could actually be used to feed human. If we are really so concerned about food, will there be enough food? Why not we consume more responsibility and share that food to more people? So if you go for plant-based diet, it does really help in that sense. And this is a quick picture to show, to have 1 pound of this burger patty, how much resources does it use, and it could channel to other human consumption instead. Yeah. So no meat. Let's try to go for plant-based diet. And plant-based diet locally, what can we do? Please join community farming. And the youth center here is going to start community farming soon, whereby we can come and learn how to grow some vegetables at home and consume in-house locally.
In-house locally. She emphasized that when she looked at me. In-house locally. Okay, I think all our panelists actually encourage that quite a lot. So youths out there, audiences there, please really consider your choices and also consume locally. I'm echoing what they have just said. Okay, yeah, so now, okay, for the next portion, yeah, I will actually do a quick closing. I'll do a quick closing of what we have actually discussed today, and as well as passing the time back to the host in a little while. So, in closing, these are some of the things that I jot down, some of the thoughts, from all the discussion just now. So, in closing, when we think about threats to our environment, to our food security, we tend to picture cars, industrial pollution, smokestacks, but not exactly dinner. Do you agree? We don't really exactly picture dinner when we talk about threats to survival and also our environment. But the truth is our need for food actually poses one of the greatest danger and risks to ourselves and the planet. So, you see, food production and agriculture, when I hear from Minai, is among the greatest contributor to global warming, emitting more greenhouse gases than our transportation system combined together, even much larger than that. So the environmental challenges posed by agriculture are really huge. And they will only become more pressing as we try to meet the growing demand for food worldwide. Not just in Singapore, not just in Asia, but worldwide. Unfortunately, you will realize that the debate over how to address this global food challenge has become pretty much polarized. Okay, we have the supporters here today in the room, people who advocate very strongly. But this question on this global food challenge has become quite polarized. You actually pit conventional agriculture and global commerce against local food systems that we mentioned just now. So the argument can be quite fierce. If you have read widely on this topic, this topic can be quite fiercely argued, just like how we see in foreign politics. We seem to getting to be a little more divided, okay, than finding common ground to solve this problem on a global level. Unless we all come together to solve this, otherwise we are all going to hit nowhere, separately. So this is a pivotal moment, okay, with the COVID-19, with the climate change intensifying. It's a pivotal moment when we face unprecedented challenges to our food security and our environment. But the good news here is something encouraging, is that actually we already know what we have to do. We already know what we have to do. We just need to figure out how to do it collaboratively. We have the solutions out there. Just need to know how to get together to do it. So addressing our global food challenges demands that all of us become a bit more thoughtful, okay? The way you consume, the way you eat, the choices you make, about the food we put on our plates. Okay, we need to make connections between our food and the farmers who grow it, and between our food and the land, the watersheds, the climate that actually sustained us. So next time, everyone, as we steer our grocery carts down the aisles of our supermarkets in future, the choices we made will help us decide the future. So in closing, I would like to once again thank you, everyone. Thank you, our panelists, for putting this together, the content, the very insightful sharing that you have had with us today. So will there be enough food? Open-ended question. Let us continue this conversation further and find our common ground to make that a reality, and not an unknown future tense. Okay, thank you, everyone. Back to you, host. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelvin, for bringing us through this session of discussion today. I learned about the Singapore strategy in food sustainability, the innovative ways in resolving the issues that farmers are facing in other parts of the region, and of course, a fuller picture on the challenges that our generation will and is already facing today. Seems like there is a lot more that young people have to do and learn. So on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank the panelists and for their valuable sharings and insights, and the participants for their attendance and robust discussion on Zoom. Up next, we're going to have some event updates before we end the session. Good news for those who like to take action or learn more about community farming. HYC has initiated an urban farming project, so if you're interested, please do join us. Today's discussion is actually a start to the series of webinars. So up next, we'll be exploring on the topic of plastics, titled Bubbles Double, Plastic Trouble. So do like our Facebook page or social media account, keep a lookout, and we look forward to you joining us. Lastly, we'll be sending a questionnaire to everyone. Feel free to give us your feedback as well. I'll end the session with a video of the urban farming promo. Goodbye, and have a pleasant week ahead.
Having a garden is really a very good platform, especially for myself, to raise awareness about what's happening in the environment. Hopefully also start to be aware about the food or even the food issues that we are facing, and the fact that we are importing like more than 90% of our food.
Along the way, we also understand in Singapore, land is so expensive. Even big farms are having problems keeping their farm space. As somebody that stay in HDB, so do 80% of Singaporeans. Plant inside my HDB.
It may not provide enough to like feed everybody, but at least I think it's a good starting point. It's a good platform, to get people really to seriously think about food, about what are the how nature is actually sustaining us.
and you know exactly what you put in the soil. No melamine, no insecticide and all that.
Be responsible, and that's what the urban farming is all about. Only when you know what is healthy food, what is good food, what is, when we talk about carbon footprint, it's all related. This is a very closed ecosystem. Every practice, every choice that you make do make a difference. So when we talk about urban farming right now, I think it's very exciting when we see so many people are so excited that they want to grow their own food.
No matter how much things I do to make the whole planting experience easier, you still need to commit and put in effort.
All of us embody that spirit, make change, initiate that change, and do it creatively, and still care enough to do that. That's what we really hope to achieve.